G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. 7 minutes past 12 on Friday, must be the 25th of October. I'm going to try and collect what's being said on the world today regarding the climate science versus global warming denialists. The Liberal National Party fossil fuel lobby seems to be desperate to give the impression that there is absolutely no connection between extreme bushfires 6 to 8 weeks early in the season and global warming carbon dioxide emissions, whereas even like Phil Coperberg, the ex-New South Wales Rural Fire Service Commissioner, who's now the Commissioner for Rehabilitating the Blue Mountains after the fire, even he's been very careful how he says it, but he's explaining that the fires are getting bigger and they're getting hotter and they're happening earlier in the year, and it's a function of the changing climate. So yeah, there's a debate going on, and I thought we might capture some of it.
Recent bushfires are linked with climate change. A report by climate scientists has stirred the debate further by saying that the two are linked. The Climate Council, which was called the Climate Commission before it was defunded by the coalition government recently, says climate change is increasing the probability of extreme fire weather days and is lengthening the fire season. Well, questioned about it this morning, the Federal Environment Minister, Greg Hunt, says there is no debate about the science, and he says it's unfortunate that some people have used the New South Wales bushfires to make a political point. Simon Lauder reports.
The political debate over a link between bushfires and climate change began last week, when Federal Greens MP Adam Bandt wrote about it. He was criticised by the Environment Minister Greg Hunt for politicising an emergency. It's a point Mr Hunt repeated this morning.
The debate this week has been an attempt by some to misuse tragedy and suffering and hardship, and nobody should do that.
Mr Bandt is sticking with his criticism of the government for refusing to acknowledge any link between the Blue Mountains bushfires and climate change.
It seems that the climate science deniers are now running the show, and with people like Greg Hunt and Tony Abbott at the helm, the country is not being led, we're being misled.
A group of climate scientists has now stepped into the debate, including Professor Will Steffen from the Australian National University.
Look, I think it's important in all these issues on climate change to get the scientific facts out there. And when there's a lot of misinformation flying around, the scientific facts need to be put on the table clearly and simply so that people can understand what's happening.
Professor Steffen was a part of the Climate Commission, which was set up by the former Labor government to spread scientific information about climate change. It was dismantled by the coalition, but its members sought public donations to continue their work and now call themselves the Climate Council. Today the Council is bringing forward some of the interim findings from a new bushfires and climate change report. Professor Steffen says there is a straightforward link between bushfires and climate change.
Hotter, drier weather increases the risk of fires. It's pretty obvious. We don't have many fires during the wintertime. We have a lot more fires during the summertime when the climate is hotter. And of course, the link then to climate change is we now have a hotter climate in general than we had 50 years ago. There's more heat in the atmosphere because of the additional greenhouse gases that humans have put into the atmosphere. So that sort of link is really straightforward to make.
Are you saying that climate change has caused the recent bushfires in New South Wales?
No, that's the wrong framing. And that's why I said right at the beginning, the framing we use is influence. And this is a general principle for extreme events in general, not just bushfires, for heat waves, heavy rainfall and floods and so on. Extreme weather has been a part of climate naturally. It's just part of a chaotic climate system. The question is, as you change the fundamental features of the climate system, how do you influence the nature of those extreme events? That's the proper scientific framing. We never use the word cause in that regard. That's never been a question that scientists have asked.
In your interim report today, you say that to deny the influence of climate change on extreme fire weather places people and property at unnecessarily high risk. Are you accusing the federal government of doing that?
Well, what I'm saying is what I said before. This information is important. If risk profiles are changing, in fact, if they're increasing, this is important understanding. Now, fortunately, the fire management authorities across Australia, I think, have been very good in taking up this information really quickly and factoring into how they deal with these risks and how they deal with the fires when they break out. That's the sort of information that we're talking about, is that to deny it and say that nothing is happening and we don't need to change anything actually would increase risk for people and property. Fortunately, fire authorities do understand the science and are taking, I think, appropriate action to deal with these increased risks.
The Environment Minister Greg Hunt says he and the Prime Minister accept the science on the broad link between bushfire risk and climate change.
This is not a debate about science. It is a debate about the carbon tax. In terms of New South Wales, nobody should try to misuse that suffering. I think that is respectfully inappropriate and wrong. And then as the broader Australian landscape shows, this has been the linked condition. The CSIRO's October 2012 report actually talks about bushfires being the Australian ecological and environmental experience for millions of years.
That's the Environment Minister, Greg Hunt, ending Simon Lauder's report. Fires may still be burning in the New South Wales Blue Mountains, but residents who have lost everything are already vowing to rebuild. Those in charge of the recovery efforts say lessons have been learned from this blaze, along with past disasters such as Black Saturday. They say homes and infrastructure in the area will be better planned and designed for future fires. However, urban planning and disaster recovery experts say that rebuilding in these extremely bushfire-prone areas is unsafe and even irresponsible. Lucy Carter reports.
When the Lynxview Road fire swept through Winmalee, Springwood and Yellow Rock last Thursday, it destroyed close to 200 homes. But Blue Mountains Mayor Mark Greenhill says almost all the residents he's spoken with are planning to stay and rebuild.
They're saying that this is a wonderful community, that they're proud to be part of it and that they want to stay in the Blue Mountains. They love this place, they love the people around them and they want to be here.
Most of the homes destroyed last week were built along ridges or in valleys. Many backed onto bushland with just one street to get residents in and out. Professor of Environment and Planning at RMIT University, Michael Buxton, says allowing people to rebuild in these areas is dangerous.
And even in areas that aren't mapped as high risk, I mean, on the wrong day, much of southeastern Victoria and parts of New South Wales are high fire risk. So it is irresponsible, and governments really don't like to take these hard decisions. We've got to realise that the situation is going to worsen. We're moving into, a whole new environmental context here with climate change. Things are going to get worse, and governments have got to start taking tough decisions that they've avoided in the past, and stop people going to live in high fire risk areas, or they're going to face catastrophe.
Edward Blakely is an honorary professor in urban policy and disaster recovery at the University of Sydney.
I think you should think of this as a settlement issue, and then how should we resettle the area, not thinking about rebuilding the homes where they are.
Dr. Blakely's worked on recovery efforts like Hurricane Katrina and Black Saturday. He says communities need guidance to make smarter and safer building decisions.
I think what we have done in the past is put all this on the homeowner rather than thinking of the community responsibility, and a person can get a development application through on the basis of a single house. The development application should be for an entire area, and within that area there are certain places where you can build, certain places where roads are put in, and you have to build responsibly here. That means you have to say there's certain kinds of vegetation that's not going to go in my neighborhood, just because all of us have to live here.
So does this need to become a local and state and even federal government issue?
I think it does. As you know, in Katrina, we used federal funds to buy some people out and reposition them in neighborhoods, in a cluster. So you didn't lose your neighbors. You all went from one neighborhood to another. It was a safer place. I think we have to think about these kind of strategies.
Phil Koperberg, the Emergency Recovery Coordinator for the Blue Mountains, says telling people they can't rebuild would be problematic.
We can't create a totally safe environment for everyone. Everyone does their own risk assessment, hopefully a risk assessment that is informed by whatever information is available. Now, we can tag it as irresponsible if we like, but the very nature of this continent is that it is from time to time subjected to elements of meteorology which put people's lives and property at risk. That doesn't mean to say we become blasé about it and do nothing about it. We need to get smarter, of course we do.
He says lessons have been learned from past bushfire disasters like Black Saturday.
Technology is evolving and emerging. It is being quickly taken up. Building designs are the subject of scrutiny by learned organisations such as CSIRO and other expert people in the field. The way in which we're managing the combustible fuel improves as each year goes by, albeit that we are at the mercy of the weather.
Professor Michael Buxton from RMIT University says that despite advances in technology and planning, there is still no such thing as a fireproof home.
You can improve the ability of a house to be defended. In theory, you could probably build a blockhouse that will be able to be defended against most fires, and we've seen people do that. But in a practical sense, people aren't going to do that. I mean, the cost is too high.
It's an emotional issue and one that the experts say is extremely difficult to broach with people who've just lost their homes. But Dr. Blakely says that's the right time to raise the issue.
People start focusing on why it happened rather than what should be done. We spend a lot of money on these commissions, which is after the floods in Brisbane, pointing the finger rather than pointing the way. And I think it's time for us to say, okay, before these things happen again in Western Australia, as we know they will, in Queensland, as we know they will, let's bring people together, talk about what has to be done, because this is a near-term issue. This is not something that's going to happen 50 or 100 years from now. It's going to happen violently, quickly, and many more times.
Blue Mountains Mayor Mark Greenhill agrees it's a discussion that needs to be had.
We need to take that on board. Everybody needs to be open to all of the analysis that's going to come out of this. If we enter this discussion with closed minds, then I don't think we've given the community the best outcome. What's best for the community, for the Blue Mountains, is that everyone is open and honest, everything is on the table, and we look at outcomes and solutions that best protect people. People matter most.
Blue Mountains Mayor Mark Greenhill ending that report from Lucy Carter. The West Australian Liberal MP Don Randall has
Okay. Well, as you can see, the argument is on, and as I said, it's climate science versus global warming denialists. Now, the denialists are saying that it is, quote, air quotes, alarmist to suggest that fires of the scale, the magnitude and the intensity that we've just been experiencing around the Sydney Basin in October, middle of spring, is unprecedented. They're saying, oh no, that's not unprecedented. We've had fires in October before. Yeah, we have. Back in 2002 we had fires in October. Section 44 fires, and a Section 44 fire, for all of those subscribers of mine overseas, that's when the local regional RFS, Rural Fire Service, can't handle it, and state or national resources are automatically called in. Section 44 is just the clause that allows the funding for it. Here's a fire map from the 21st of October 2002. I come to be in possession of it because that black area, that's what we were told was the fire area when we went out to try and play with it in the morning. And the boundaries of the red dotted line, that's how far we retreated in one day. It was the usual firestorm style of a thing. You know, wind got over 60 mile an hour, they grounded the helicopters and the fixed wing planes, and then a dust storm hit and you couldn't see 50 metres. And yeah, it wasn't a boring day at all. But these were the fires that were happening around here on the 21st of October, is in the black cross hatchings. Here we see 25th or 24th, 25th of October, same area. Basically, as the fire gets bigger and the resources thrown at it get better, there's the Rockwood fire I was telling you about. And for those of you who are interested, that little spot there is where I am at the moment. As the resources get better, the maps they print out every day get better. 5th of November was all still happening out there. By the 9th of November, it had all pretty much kind of moved out of our area and off into the Clarence area. And unlike my son, I don't fight away matches. So I haven't got any further maps on that one. But the salient point, the reason I showed you the maps is to point out the dates on them and the location. Here we are right up at the northeast corner of New South Wales, and 11 years ago we had big fires in October. Now the big fires in October have moved 450 road miles south. It might be only 250 miles as the crow flies, but it means the bushfire season has moved 6 or 8 weeks ahead of schedule. Alright? Now the people who are whinging and bitching about greenies preventing anybody from doing any burning off, they ought to come and have a little bit of a look and sit down and think about the fact that if you light a fire, permit season or not, in a permit season you have to get somebody to come and check your place and make sure you've got a 3 metre ploughed earth boundary inside your fence to contain the fire. Well, there's some country where you just can't do that. So outside of permit season, if you light a fire and it gets off your place, you're not only responsible for the cost of fixing the fence, you're responsible for any damage caused by that fire after it goes off your place, which is why the Royal Australian Army is now starting to shit blue lights. Because as they said on this morning's AM program, if you or I set off firecrackers in our backyard and it burns the neighbour's house down, we are responsible for the cost of the house. Okay, so the reason we're not allowed to burn off is respect for the fences, respect for pasture for grazing animals, respect for not putting smoke across roads and across suburbs and towns. And there's also the fact that burning off is done by volunteers and it has to happen on weekends and it has to be scheduled around other training courses, which is also done by volunteers on weekends, and it has to be scheduled around what the weather permits. So the fact that New South Wales RFS got through 80% of its scheduled hazard reduction burn program this year, it's miraculous. They've done a brilliant job. It's not the greenies who stop people from burning off. If the greenies had their way, people would be out there burning whatever patch of Australia needs to be burnt, essentially straight after it rains. As soon as it gets dry enough to burn, have a bit of a fire then. That gets rid of all your worst shit. Right? And continue burning off anything that needs being burnt. Try and learn to live like a blackfella, but the people in the towns and the cities, they're not going to do that, and the economy won't stand for it, and the farmers and the agriculturalists, they won't stand for it either. Now, as for the people who reckon that it's, quote, politicising the debate to speak about climate change, global warming, carbon dioxide release to the atmosphere, the price of carbon versus the cost of carbon because there's bushfires on, look, you're not understanding how science works. Scientific method is somebody has an observation that piques their curiosity. In this case, a Dutchman called Arrhenius observed that the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere had slightly risen. And he developed a theory 130, 150 years ago that the reason it was rising was because the Industrial Revolution had burnt so much coal. And he postulated that if they continued to burn coal and pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, carbon dioxide being a greenhouse gas, it would warm the Earth's air. That was the theory. The economists have conducted the experiment, and for the economists and the politicians to say the scientists should shut up and stop politicising the issue just when the results are coming in, fuck off. It's just getting interesting. You can't say that science is politics. Science is science. The economists started the experiment. They're the ones who want to keep going with it. It's the scientists who want to stop the fucking experiment. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Ciao.